That night, I stood by my 23rd floor window watching the Seattle rain when the notification lit up. You have been removed from the family wedding group. 5 minutes later, my mother texted, "Stop making things messy." I realized they hadn't just cut me from my sister's wedding, they cut me from the family. 3 weeks later, a mysterious guest would silence them, but the real shock wasn't the ring. It was the sealed letter opened right where they meant to humiliate me. My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 31 years old, and I am a brand strategist at Northline Creative. My job is to find the soul of a company, the narrative thread that makes it authentic, and weave it into a story the world will believe. I am good at my job because I know, better than anyone, how to construct a flawless facade. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, which felt inappropriately mundane. It was not hand-delivered. It was not FedExed. It came via the standard United States Postal Service, tucked between a utilities bill and a catalog for minimalist furniture. Even the envelope was an act of aggression. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the kind that costs $7 a sheet. My name, Ms. Nora Whitfield, was written in shimmering gold calligraphy, but it wasn't Sabrina's handwriting. It was the detached, perfect script of a hired professional who knew nothing of the history simmering beneath the ink. My sister, Sabrina, was getting married. I knew this, of course, not because she had called me, but because I had seen the blurred digital photo of her engagement ring on our parents' shared social media feed, captioned, "Our baby is starting her next chapter." I slit the envelope. The invitation inside was heavier still. A 3-panel monstrosity of beveled edges and inlaid tissue paper. The main event was in Savannah, Georgia, a destination, a statement. My phone rang before I had even finished reading the RSVP card. The caller ID was Whitfield Family, a contact I should have deleted years ago. I let it ring 3 times, a small, pointless act of defiance, before answering. "Hello, Mother." "Nora, you got it." Then, not a question, a statement of fact. My mother, Eleanor, operated on logistics, not emotion. "The invitation just arrived. It's elaborate." "Of course it is," she said, her voice tight with a familiar, defensive pride. "We want this to be perfect for your sister, which is why your father and I need to talk to you." "I'm listening." I heard the click of the other line picking up. "Nora," my father's voice boomed, already calibrated for disappointment. "We're calling to say that we think it's best. Well, we'd prefer it if you didn't come to the wedding." The silence that followed was dense and absolute. Down on the street, a Seattle-specific kind of rain had begun to fall, the kind that isn't quite a storm but promises to last for days. "You'd prefer I not come," I repeated. My voice, the one I used for difficult clients, remained perfectly level. "Don't be dramatic, Nora." My father sighed. "You know how you get. You have a tendency to make things about you. This is Sabrina's day. She doesn't need the stress, and frankly, neither do we." "What stress am I causing?" "Exactly that," my mother cut in, her voice rising. "That tone. You're already arguing. We just want one single-family event that doesn't dissolve into your feelings." My gaze drifted to a framed photo on my bookshelf. It was me and Theo from work, arms slung over each other's shoulders at the company retreat, grinning. There were no photos of my family in my apartment, because in every family photo taken in the last decade, I was the conspicuous absence. I thought of the Christmas I drove 12 hours through a blizzard from my first post-college job, arriving at 8 p.m., only to find they had eaten dinner without me because Sabrina was too hungry to wait. I thought of my 30th birthday, which passed with only a group text from my father. "Happy birthday. Your mother is busy." I remembered the sprawling Whitfield family portrait they'd had commissioned 5 years ago. I was living in the same city then, only 20 minutes away. They told me the painter's schedule was too tight to accommodate mine. In the painting, my parents and Sabrina are a perfect triangular unit, glowing in pastoral light. "Nora, are you listening?" my father demanded. I'm here. Good. We're glad we have this understanding. We'll send you the link to the live stream. Of course. We'll talk to you soon. The line clicked dead. They hadn't waited for my reply. There was no understanding. It was a directive. I stared at my phone. A moment later, a new notification appeared at the top of the screen. The family group chat, the one I was rarely brave enough to mute, flashed. The name, formerly Whitfield Family Bed, had been changed. The new name was Sabrina's Day Only. My fingers went numb. I tapped on the icon. I scrolled up, seeing the sudden flurry of messages I was now excluded from, photos of cake tastings, screenshots of floral arrangements. I tapped on the shared media album, the one where my mother uploaded everything. A new message appeared. You do not have permission to view this album. My breath hitched. This was different. This was a digital amputation. They hadn't just uninvited me. They were scrubbing the evidence that I had ever been part of the conversation. The next morning at Northline Creative, the contrast was almost violent. Our office is all reclaimed wood and structural steel, a place where ideas are currency and execution is king. I was running a branding meeting for a new sustainable tech client, my mind sharp, my voice confident. I was in my element. The narrative isn't just greens, it's future-proof, I argued, sketching a quadrant on the whiteboard. We're not selling a product, we're selling systemic change. The team was engaged, the ideas flowing. For 2 hours, I was just Nora Whitfield, strategist. I was competent. I was valued. After the meeting, my colleague Theo, who doubled as my work husband and bullshit detector, caught my arm as I headed for coffee. Hey, powerhouse, you good? You've got that flawless execution look, which usually means the rest of your life is on fire. I forced a laugh. Just managing expectations? Theo, you know the drill. He softened. Right. Well, I'm guessing by the vibe that the big wedding invitation arrived. I nodded, grabbing a mug. It did. And? Are we planning on spiked punch? A dramatic speech? Neither. I poured the coffee, watching the black liquid fill the cup. I've been disinvited. Theo stopped moving. He was one of the few people who knew the broad strokes of my family's dynamic. Disinvited? From your own sister's wedding? Nora, that's not a thing. That's medieval. They prefer I don't make it about me, I said, the words tasting like ash. It's fine. It's better this way. Less pretense. It is not fine, he said, his voice low and angry on my behalf. That's your family. Is it? I looked at him, and for a second, the mask almost slipped. Sometimes I'm not so sure. I turned away and walked back to my desk. I opened my phone, looked at the Sabrina's Day Only chat icon, and held my finger on it. My thumb hovered over delete and block, but I couldn't. Deleting it felt like conceding. Instead, my hand trembling slightly, I pressed archive. I hid it, I buried it, but I did not let it go. That night, the night of the hook, I stood at my window watching the rain. My apartment on the 23rd floor was my sanctuary, the one place I had built that was entirely, unequivocally mine. The rain was relentless, blurring the lights of the boats on Lake Union into watercolor smears. I had made my decision. I would not call them. I would not text Sabrina and appeal to a sisterly bond that had evaporated a decade ago. I would not send a passive-aggressive gift. I would not beg to be led into a room where I so clearly was not wanted. My silence would be my answer. I would take my 31 years of hurt, and I would be done. And then, my laptop chimed. An email. It was from my father. The subject line read, "Regarding our conversation and your future conduct." My blood went cold. It wasn't an apology. It was a manifesto. I opened it. It was a long, scrolling document, formatted with bullet points. My father, an attorney who believed emotion was a failure of litigation, had titled it, "A Summary of Emotional Discipline." He proceeded to list, in chronological order, every perceived slight, every argument, every time I had failed to meet the Whitfield standard of quiet compliance over the last 10 years. Item: Thanksgiving, 2014. Your disruptive tears regarding the seating arrangement, which caused your sister significant distress. I remembered I had cried because they forgot to set a place for me at the main table. I had eaten on a stool in the kitchen. Item: Christmas, 2016. Your unprofessional reaction to the choice of family vacation, resulting in a financial loss for the family when you refused to attend. I had refused to go to Hawaii because it was scheduled during my final exams in grad school, which I had told them about for 6 months. Item: Your continued insistence on pursuing a creative career rather than a stable one, which has repeatedly reflected poorly on the family's reputation for practical success. On and on it went. A meticulously curated history of my failures, my dramas, my very existence as a problem. It was gaslighting as a legal brief. He was building a case against me, proving to himself, and to my mother, that I was not a daughter being exiled, but a liability being managed. I read it all, my skin growing colder, the rain hammering the glass. I reached the end, my heart a dry, rattling thing in my chest. And then I saw the final paragraph. Given this documented history of instability, he wrote, your mother and I have been forced to protect the family's assets from your erratic behavior. We have met with the estate lawyers. The matter of the Whitfield inheritance and the family trust is now settled. We have insured Sabrina's future. Do not expect anything. This is not negotiable, and any attempt to contest it will be met with the full force of this evidence. I stared at the words. Do not expect anything. This was it. The transaction. The final bill. All those years of trying to be smaller, quieter, less me. It was never enough, and now I was being fined for it. A strange calm settled over me. The shock was gone, replaced by a crystalline Arctic clarity. The brand strategist in my head took over. I looked at the email. It was a threat. It was a verdict. It was an invoice for my own emotional pain. But it was also, as my father the lawyer should have known, evidence. I did not reply. I did not delete it. I forwarded the email to my private, encrypted server. Then, I turned to the small printer in the corner of my home office. The cheap plastic word to life. A stark, mechanical sound in the quiet of the room. 1 page, then 2, then 3. The entire devastating ledger of my life, according to my father. I pulled the warm pages from the tray. I 3-hole punched them. I went to my bookshelf and took down a new, black moleskin notebook. I opened it to the first page and clipped the email inside. Exhibit A. My eyes fell on the wedding invitation, still lying on my coffee table. The beautiful, heavy cardstock. The perfect, soulless calligraphy. It looked so expensive, so curated. I picked it up, walked across the room, and let it fall from my fingers. It fluttered to the dark hardwood floor by my front door. The light from the hallway caught the gold foil embossing, making it gleam. It was beautiful, and it was as cold and final as a judgment. The doors were locked. The papers were signed. I was, officially, out. I didn't sleep. The rain from the night before had washed the city clean, leaving behind that sharp, ozone scent of a Seattle morning, a scent that usually calmed me. That day, it just felt sterile. I was at the office by 6 a.m., 2 hours before anyone else. The green tech client pitch was in 3 days. Their ask was vague. We want to be the future of energy, but make it human. It was the kind of challenge I lived for, a blank page waiting for a soul. I locked myself in a conference room, the one with the whiteboard wall. I didn't just work. I attacked. I shut down the part of my brain that was Nora Whitfield, daughter, and let the strategist take over. The strategist was a different person. She was cold, precise, and lived on data, black coffee, and the clean satisfaction of a perfect keynote slide. I compartmentalized. The email from my father was in a locked folder. The ache in my chest was in a box labeled Later. The humiliation was a fuel source, burning cold and bright. I diagrammed brand ecosystems. I wrote copy. I built a narrative architecture so tight, so compelling, that it was bulletproof. By the time my team started filtering in at 8:30, I had a 50-page deck outlined and the core campaign tagline drafted. "The power isn't in the grid," I wrote on the board. "It's in the choice." I worked through lunch, ignoring the dull throb behind my eyes. My boss, Catherine, walked by at 3 in the afternoon. She stopped, watched me for a moment as I typed, my back to the door. "Nora," she said. I swiveled in my chair. Catherine was a woman who had shattered her own glass ceilings and kept the shards as trophies. She never wasted words. "That pitch deck you sent me this morning, it's not just good, it's lethal." "It's not done," I said. "I'm still refining the market segmentation." "Stop," she walked in, holding a tablet. "I'm not here about the pitch. I'm here about you. We just landed the Aventech account. It's a full-scale global rebrand, and it's a monster. I need a new team lead." I waited. "It's yours," she said. "The title, the pay bump, the team of 8, it's yours, if you want it." I looked at her. This was the validation I had been chasing my entire professional life. This was the promotion I should have been angling for, the one I had told myself I'd get by the end of the year. It landed in my lap in the middle of my personal wreckage, and I felt nothing, just a quiet, hollow click. "I want it," I said. My voice was steady. "Good," she nodded, satisfied. "You start as soon as the green tech pitch is over." She left. I turned back to my screen. A team lead, a global rebrand. I was being given more responsibility, more value, more of a reason to be at this desk from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. I accepted it. I accepted it like a soldier accepting new armor. It was a promise, not of happiness, but of self-respect. I would build a life so full of professional success that there would be no room left for them to occupy. I was so deep in that resolve that I almost missed the notification. A social media tag. It was my Aunt Judith. I clicked. It was Sabrina. She had posted a carousel of new photos. The wedding venue wasn't in Savannah anymore. They had moved it. Now it was a sprawling, opulent estate in Savannah, the kind with ancient oak trees dripping in Spanish moss, the kind of place that cost a fortune. The photos were of Sabrina trying on a new, even more elaborate gown. She was twirling, laughing, bathed in the buttery light of a high-end bridal boutique. And then I read the comments. My mother. "My perfect angel. You deserve this, and so much more." A cousin. "Absolutely breathtaking. Sabrina. So glad this is coming together without any drama." And then Aunt Judith. "So much more peaceful now. It's a blessing when the family supports the bride. Wish Nora could learn to not ruin the mood." I didn't breathe. My name, right there, in public, under the lace and the laughter. Wish Nora could learn to not ruin the mood. The disinvited, the exiled, was somehow from 2,500 miles away. Still the problem. I was the ghost haunting their perfect day. My hands were perfectly still on my keyboard. I felt Theo's eyes on me from across the open office, a question in his gaze. I gave him a small, tight smile and turned back to my screen, my face a perfect mask of professional concentration. I did not close the tab. I opened a new one. I went to an airline website. I typed in my destination, Port Townsend, Washington, a small, Victorian seaport town about 2 hours from Seattle. It was quiet, full of books, and perched on the edge of the world. It was the last place anyone would think to look for me. I checked the dates. The wedding was in 3 weeks. Saturday, June 4th. I booked a non-refundable, round-trip ticket. Friday, June 3rd, to Sunday, June 5th. I reserved a room at a small inn that overlooked the water. I was not going to fight for them. I was not going to beg for a seat at their table. I was going to hide. That night, the decision to run sat in my stomach like cold stones. I was a 31-year-old woman with a major promotion, and I was booking a trip to hide from my sister's wedding. The victory felt pathetic. I poured a glass of wine. I sat on my sofa, and I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I opened a dating app. It was an act of pure, sterile curiosity, a data-gathering exercise. My family had declared me worthless. My company had declared me valuable. I wanted a third-party opinion. I wanted to know, in the crude, transactional marketplace of modern dating, what was my exchange rate? I updated my old, dusty profile. I was ruthless. No blurry group photos, no self-deprecating jokes. I wrote a bio that was short, precise, and honest in a way that felt like a dare. Brand strategist. I take abstract ideas and make them tangible. I prefer books to people, but I am open to being convinced otherwise. Love's words above all else. I swiped left, left, left. The faces blurred. Men holding fish, men on mountains, men in bars. It was a catalog of performative happiness. I felt nothing. This was a mistake. I was about to delete the app when a message came through. It wasn't hey or a fire emoji. The name was Graham Pierce. His photo was simple. A man in his late 30s, looking away from the camera, standing in what looked like an old library. His message, "Your profile says love's words above all else. So, what do you write at 3 a.m.? The question sideswiped me. It wasn't a pickup line. It was an inquiry. He wasn't asking what I did for a living or what I was looking for. He was asking about my internal life. I looked at the cursor blinking on the screen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being called dramatic or too intense. I typed, "At 3 a.m., I write about the smell of Seattle rain, not the soft, romantic kind, but the smell of petrichor hitting hot pavement in August, the smell of ozone and wet asphalt, and the promise that something is finally breaking the humidity. It smells like a held breath being released. That's what I write." I hit send. It was a 100-word essay, a vulnerable, overwritten, deeply me response. My family would have called it kitsch. He replied in less than a minute. "That's a very specific, very good answer. The held breath. I know that feeling. I always thought it smelled more like wet concrete and existential dread, but I like your version better." We started talking. We didn't text. We wrote paragraphs. He told me he was in publishing, that he read manuscripts for a living. I told him I wrote taglines. He told me he was a terrible cook. I told him I lived on coffee and deadlines. The hours unspooled. It was midnight, then 1 a.m. He never once asked what I was running from. He never asked about my family, my exes, or my wounds. He just asked about me. What books were on my nightstand? What was the last idea that truly excited me? And then he asked the question that broke me. "Nora Whitfield, what makes you feel at peace?" I stared at the words, peace. It was a foreign concept, a word for other people. I thought about it. I thought about my office, my apartment, my life. I typed the truest thing I had ever written. When I don't have to prove my value to anyone. I sent it, and then, sitting alone in my perfect, silent apartment, I put my head in my hands and cried. I cried for the first time since my father's email. I wept quietly, not because I was sad, but because I had just, in one sentence, articulated the entire crushing weight of my existence. I had never, not for one day in my life, felt that kind of peace. My phone chimed. "Graham, that sounds like a peace worth finding. I'm in Seattle for the next 48 hours. I have a gap tomorrow. 30 minutes for coffee. No pressure. Just a short, caffeinated conversation. Yes?" A 30-minute meeting. I understood that. It was quantifiable. It had boundaries. It was safe. "Yes," I typed. "Short is good." We met the next afternoon at a small, independent coffee shop on a side street in Capitol Hill. I was 5 minutes early. He was already there, at a corner table, reading a physical book. He looked up when I walked in, and he smiled. "Nora," he said, standing up, "you're real." "So are you," I said, managing a small smile of my own. The coffee was supposed to be 30 minutes. We talked about books. We talked about the flawed narrative structure of modern cinema. He told me about his grandfather's antique watch, the one he was wearing. I told him about the green tech pitch, about the challenge of selling choice. He listened in a way I wasn't used to. He wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk. He was processing, connecting. He would nod slowly and say, "That's interesting. So the real product isn't the technology, it's the autonomy." He saw the subtext. He saw me. I looked at my watch. 4 hours had passed. The sun was beginning to set, painting the cafe in warm, golden light. The baristas were starting to set up for the evening rush. "It's almost 7, I said, shocked. "So it is," Graham said, not looking at his own watch. "I guess short is a relative term." "I should go," I said, though I didn't want to. "You should," he smiled, and it was a genuine, kind smile that didn't demand anything in return. "Thank you for the coffee. Nora, it was the best meeting I've had all year." I walked out of the coffee shop and into the cool evening air. My mind was quiet. The buzzing anxiety that lived under my skin was, for the first time, gone. I didn't know who Graham Pierce was, not really. But for 4 hours, I hadn't had to prove my value. I just was, and it was the first moment of peace I had ever known. Graham texted 2 days later. The green tech pitch had been a success. A brutal, exhausting, exhilarating win that had left me running on fumes and the sharp, clean high of professional validation. Catherine had clapped me on the back, and Theo had brought me a double espresso, which I'd accepted like a trophy. I was just crashing, my head on my desk, when my phone buzzed. "I have to read 3 manuscripts on medieval aqueducts this weekend. It's soul-crushing. Save me. A walk, Cary Park, Thursday at 6. It was a request, but it felt like a statement of fact. It was practical, clear, and had a defined endpoint. It was, perhaps, the most appealing invitation I had ever received. "I can do 6, I typed back. "But if you bring up aqueducts, I'm leaving." "Deal," he replied instantly. Thursday came with a rare, clear-sky Seattle evening. Cary Park was, of course, a cliché. It was the postcard shot, the one everyone on a tourist bus stopped to capture. The skyline, the Space Needle, the water, and the mountain all lined up in perfect, boastful geometry. I had always avoided it for that reason. It felt performative. He was already there, leaning against the railing, looking out. He wasn't looking at the view. He was watching the people. He wore a dark wool jacket that was clearly old, but just as clearly expensive, and the same scuffed but clean leather shoes. He wasn't dressed to impress a date. He was dressed for a walk on a cool evening. "The view almost makes you feel obligated to be impressed, doesn't it?" I said as I walked up. He turned, and that slow smile lit his face. "I always thought so, like it's demanding a response. Aren't I beautiful? I prefer the side streets." "Me too," I said, and I meant it. We walked. We didn't rehash our first conversation. We just started a new one. He told me what an independent publishing investor actually did. He wasn't a shark from a Big Five house, he explained. He ran a small, private fund. "I'm a story hunter," he said, kicking a small stone on the path. "The big houses, they want books that are like other books. They want a guaranteed return. I'm looking for the books that are like nothing else. The weird, brilliant, unmarketable first novel from a poet in Idaho, or the history of jazz told through diner menus, the stories that would die if someone didn't bet on them." "That sounds risky," I said. "It is, and I lose money about 40% of the time." He shrugged. "But the other 60%, that's where you find the voices that matter. It's a long-term investment in a different kind of value." I, a brand strategist who built value propositions for a living, felt a strange pang of professional envy. He wasn't building a brand. He was curating a legacy. I looked at him more closely. I was a professional at observation, at finding the narrative in the details. My father's watch was a Rolex, heavy, bright, a statement of arrival. Graham's was an old automatic, the crystal bearing a faint, spidery scratch near the number 2. It was beautiful, but it was quiet. "Your watch is wrong," I said. "It's 6:40, not 6:30. He glanced at it, a flicker of affection in his eyes. It's my grandfather's. It loses about 10 minutes a day. Like clockwork. I could get it fixed. But I've had it for 20 years. No to add 10 minutes. I like the system. A man who preferred to manually adjust for a flaw rather than replace the object. I filed that piece of data away. We found a bench. We sat. The conversation, which had flowed so easily, just stopped. And the silence that fell was not the silence I knew. It wasn't the agitated, judgmental silence of my family's dinner table, where the lack of words was a weapon, a prelude to an argument. It wasn't the hollow, ringing silence of my apartment after my father's email. It was just silence. It was the distant sound of traffic from the city below, the bark of a dog in the park, the click of a tourist's camera, and the steady, rhythmic sound of Graham's breathing next to me. I hadn't realized I was holding my own breath until I felt myself exhale. He didn't fidget. He didn't check his phone. He just sat, looking at the city as the lights began to flicker on, one by one. I felt safe. It was the most terrifying and profound realization I'd had in a decade. I was sitting next to a near stranger in complete silence, and I was, for the first time, completely, totally safe. "So," he said finally, his voice calm, "this is the test." I turned. "What test?" "The silence test," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "The moment you find out if you're with someone you can just be with, or if you're with someone you have to manage, I'd say we're doing pretty well." I laughed. It was a real, unguarded sound that surprised even me. Okay, we passed. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to unpack the whole sordid, humiliating story. The invitation, the email, the inheritance, the ache of being a 31-year-old ghost in my own family. But I couldn't. The words were stuck. My father's voice was too loud in my head. "Don't be dramatic. Nora, you always make it about you." So I said nothing. I kept my history locked down. Graham seemed to sense the shift, the shadow that had passed over me. He respected the boundary I hadn't even had to voice. He just simply changed the subject. "There's a great Japanese bookstore in the U District," he said, turning to me. "They have an entire section on 20th century photorealism, and a terrible, terrible cafe. We should go. Not for the coffee, for the books." "And jazz," I countered, feeling brave. "If we go, you have to explain to me why all the songs sound the same." "They don't," he said, looking genuinely appalled. And for the next 10 minutes, he explained the difference between Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and I listened, not because I cared about jazz, but because I cared that he cared. As we were walking back to our separate cars, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text. I pulled it out, assuming it was Theo. It was from my mother. The cold returned, instantly. "Nora, the wedding will be live-streamed on this link." It was a long, complicated URL. "Your father and I expect you to be discreet. This means you should not comment or post anything. Do not make this difficult." It wasn't an invitation. It was a surveillance order. They weren't just barring me from the room. They were dictating my behavior from outside the locked door. I was to be a silent, invisible, good girl, even in my exile. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could feel the sting of hot, angry tears. "Everything okay?" Graham's voice was soft. Beside me. He wasn't looking at my screen. He was looking at my face. I looked at him, this sane, kind, respectful man who knew how to sit in silence and add 10 minutes to his watch. And then I looked at the text message, a demand from a different, colder planet. I did not reply to her. I held my finger down on the icon for her name. A menu popped up. Mute notifications. I pressed it. The little crossed-out bell icon appeared next to her name. It was the smallest, most powerful act of rebellion I had performed in my entire life. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked up at Graham. For the first time, my smile was not a strategy. It was real. "Yes," I said. "Everything's fine. Just a notification I don't need anymore." I took a deep breath of the cool, clean air. I'm choosing to mute the world. He watched me for a long moment, a slow, understanding smile spreading across his face. The world, he said, can be very loud. Sometimes you have to change the settings. The day of the wedding, I was in Port Townsend. I had driven the 2 hours, taken the ferry, and checked into the small, historic inn. My room smelled of sea salt and old wood floors. It was gray and quiet. There was no Spanish moss, no five-star opulence. There was just a window overlooking the water, which was the same color as the sky. I unpacked my laptop. I set it up on the small wooden desk. I was a fugitive. But I was a fugitive with a deadline. The Aventech rebrand pitch was in 2 weeks. I had a job to do. I walked down the street to a small, cluttered bookstore that had a cafe in the back. I bought a large coffee and set up camp at a table in the corner. My phone was in my bag, on silent. I opened my laptop. I opened the pitch deck. For 3 hours. I was Nora Whitfield, team lead. I wrote copy. I designed wireframes. I built a narrative about identity and autonomy for a global tech company. I was sharp. I was focused. I was in control. At 2 p.m., Pacific time, 5 p.m. in Savannah, the probable time of the ceremony, I stopped. The pitch deck was open on one side of my screen. On the other, I opened a new, blank document. I looked at the blinking cursor. My sister was walking down an aisle. My parents were watching. Their faces masks of perfect, proud happiness. Aunt Judith was probably dabbing her eyes, praising the lack of drama. And I was here, the ghost, the mood ruiner. I felt the tears coming, the familiar, hot sting of self-pity. Don't you dare, I told myself, don't you dare cry, right? My father had written his list of my failures. I would write my own story. I put my fingers on the keys and, to stop myself from weeping, I began my novel. I wrote the first sentence I had been holding in my head for 10 years. The first time I realized I was a ghost, I was 10 years old, and my mother had forgotten to set my place at the table. I wrote for an hour. I wrote for 2. I wrote until the tears dried, and the ache in my chest was replaced by the clean, sharp burn of creation. I wasn't just a strategist, I was a writer. At sunset, I closed my laptop. The ceremony was over. The reception would be starting. They would be dancing. I walked to a hole-in-the-wall pizza place and ordered 1 slice of pepperoni. I went to the inn's small pantry and bought a half bottle of a ridiculously overpriced Oregon Pinot Noir. I took my paper plate and my bottle and my plastic cup up to my room. I sat on the small balcony, wrapped in a hotel blanket. The wind off the water was cold. I had never felt more alone or more complete. There was no one to celebrate with, no one to call. No one had even texted to see if I was okay. I poured the wine into the plastic cup. I held it up to the gray, fading light. To me, I whispered. My voice was hoarse. For getting through the day, I toast myself. I drank. The wine was good. I was finishing the slice of pizza when my phone lit up. Face down on the table. My heart seized. It was them. An angry text. A new accusation. I turned it over. It was Graham. It wasn't a text. It was a picture. He had taken a photo, slightly blurry, of the night sky, just a smattering of stars visible through the city light. The message underneath read, "Same sky, 2 cities, hope yours is peaceful tonight. Nora." He didn't know where I was. He didn't know what day it was. He was just connecting, sending a signal, from his world to mine. I held the phone to my chest. I didn't reply. I went inside, brushed my teeth, and got into bed. The sheets were crisp and cold. And for the first time in more than a decade, I fell asleep instantly. I did not dream of my father. I did not dream of a locked door. I did not dream of the family dinner table. I dreamed of nothing at all. I just slept, a deep, dark, healing sleep as the tide pulled away from the shore outside my window. The Aventech rebrand was a triumph. I didn't just lead the team. I set a new standard at Northline, my new title. Director of Brand Strategy. came with an office that had a door I could close, which I valued more than the raise. For 2 months, my life was a clean, orderly machine. I worked, I had dinner with Graham, I slept. The silence from my family was a blessing. A void I filled with successful campaign metrics and the quiet, growing comfort of a relationship that didn't demand I be anything other than what I was. And then, of course, they called. It was a Tuesday, my mother's number. My muted notifications meant I didn't see it ring, but the voicemail alert appeared, a small, red, digital accusation. Nora. Her voice was bright, casual, as if we spoke every day. Your father and I are going to be in Boise next weekend, visiting the Hendersons. You remember them. We'll be there for a few days. We'd like to take you to dinner. Saturday, the 7th, at 7. Call me so I can make the reservation. I listened to it 3 times. The casualness was the first alarm. The second was the location. Boise, Idaho, a 4-hour flight from Seattle. It was the definition of neutral territory. This was not a social call. This was a summons, deliberately placed on neutral ground to minimize gossip and control the narrative. They weren't coming to my city. I was being ordered to theirs. Against my better judgment, I flew. I told myself I was going as an anthropologist, not a daughter. I was going to collect the final data points. I booked my own hotel. I took an Uber to the restaurant. It was exactly what I expected. A high-end steakhouse, all dark wood, leather booths, and the murmur of quiet, expensive conversations. It was a place designed for corporate negotiations, a room where no one would ever raise their voice. They were already there, seated in a prominent booth. My father, looking statesmanlike in a cashmere sweater. My mother, elegant and composed, a string of pearls at her throat. They looked like the perfect, benevolent couple. Nora, my mother smiled, offering her cheek for a dry kiss. You look, well, your hair is shorter. It has been for a year. Mother, I said, sliding into the booth opposite them. You both look well. We ordered drinks. We discussed the weather. We talked about the Hendersons, the fictional, faceless friends who had provided the cover story. The small talk was excruciating, a thin layer of ice over a dark, deep ocean. My father cleared his throat. It was the sound he made in his study before delivering a lecture. Nora, he began, placing his hands flat on the table. We are glad you came. Your mother and I felt it was important to have this discussion in a civilized manner. We are, as you know, at a point in our lives where we must finalize our estate. I said nothing. I just watched him. We have, of course, always been a family that values fairness, my mother chimed in, picking up the baton, and we have spent a great deal of time thinking about the future. The Whitfield Family Trust has been fully established, my father said, his voice taking on the tone of a legal deposition. It's a complex instrument, designed to protect the family's assets for generations. My mother placed her hand on his. What your father means, dear, is that we have to be practical. Sabrina is, as you know, starting her new life. She has her new home, and they are hoping to start a family soon. They have significant needs. We've decided, to ensure fairness and stability, my father continued, that the vast majority of the trust's assets will be allocated to Sabrina and her future family. It is the most responsible, practical decision. The silence stretched. The waiter came by. My father waved him away, annoyed at the interruption. I looked from my father's face, set in lines of righteous conviction, to my mother's, which was a mask of gentle, reasonable concern. The strategist in my head took over. The part of me that was a daughter was gone, packed away in a locked room. This was a negotiation, and I had just been given the opening offer. I took a slow sip of water. I set the glass down with a quiet, deliberate click. I have a clear question. Then, I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. If the vast majority goes to Sabrina, what do I get? My mother's smile tightened. She had been expecting, I think, an emotional outburst. My calm had disarmed her. Well, she said, looking down at her napkin, This isn't about numbers, Nora. It's about what is appropriate. What do I get, Mother? I repeated. She looked at my father. He nodded, giving her permission. She looked back at me. After much discussion, we've decided to leave you a symbolic amount. There it was. The word symbolic. Not a number, not a small percentage, not a token. Symbolic, a word used for things that have no practical value. A gesture, a symbol of what? Exactly. A symbol of my official worthlessness. I felt a sudden, sharp, Arctic cold. This was the moment, the final, definitive amputation. My purse was on the bench beside me. My phone was inside it. I had anticipated this. Before walking into the restaurant, I had checked the state law. Idaho, like Washington, was a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation, me, knew it was being recorded, it was legal. I had already opened my voice memo app. The phone was unlocked. As I felt that word, symbolic, land in my chest, my hand, which was resting in my lap, slid to the side. I reached into my unzipped purse. I didn't need to see. I knew where the red button was. I pressed it. The small, haptic click was undetectable. The phone in my bag was now listening. It was now a witness. A symbolic amount, I repeated, my voice still perfectly level. Can you define symbolic? Nora, don't be vulgar, my father snapped. We are not here to discuss figures. We are here to inform you of a decision that is final. So I am being written out, I said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact for the record. You are being managed, my father countered, his legalistic brain clicking back online. Your inheritance is being structured in a way that reflects your relationship with this family, a relationship you have made very difficult. I see. And just then, as if on cue, a new voice chirped. Oh my God, I thought I'd never find you. Sabrina. She appeared at the table, glowing, her hand resting on her stomach in a way that was not quite a pregnancy announcement, but was clearly meant to imply one. She was feigning surprise, but her eyes were bright and triumphant. Sabrina, my mother said, her face lighting up with genuine, uncomplicated love. What are you doing here? We were just in the neighborhood, she trilled, looking at the finishes for the new house. And Dad, you'll never guess. The bank approved the second loan for the pool house. Isn't that amazing? Oh, hi, Nora. I didn't see you there. She didn't look at me. She looked at the space I occupied. Her eyes slid over my face, over my shorter hair, over my very existence, as if I were a smudge on the glass. She turned back to our parents, launching into a breathless story about quartz countertops. My father was laughing. My mother was hanging on her every word. I was invisible, a ghost at a feast. They talked for 5 minutes. Not once did they try to include me in the conversation. I simply sat there, a silent observer, my phone quietly, diligently recording the entire performance, the proof of my non-existence. Sabrina finally wound down, kissing our father on the cheek. Well, I have to run. See you back at the hotel. Mom? Of course, baby, my mother said. Sabrina turned, and her eyes, just for a second, met mine. There was no sisterly affection. There was no malice. There was just nothing. A cold, flat indifference. Then she was gone. The silence she left behind was heavy. I looked at my parents. They were both still smiling, basking in the afterglow of their perfect, compliant daughter. I picked up my napkin. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was done. The strategist in me had all the data she needed. I have one last question, I said, and my voice was so quiet, they both had to lean in. What is it, Nora? My mother sighed, her good mood evaporating. If I am no longer in the family, I asked, and I am only worth a symbolic amount, am I still expected to pretend to smile? Am I still required for the optics? I just want to be clear on the terms of my dismissal. My father's face went dark. The mask of the civilized patriarch vanished, replaced by the cold, hard fury I knew so well. It was the face he used right before he delivered a verdict. Don't be dramatic. That word. The same word from the email. The same word he had used to dismiss my tears at Thanksgiving, to shut down my arguments, to erase my feelings for my entire life. It was the kill switch for my personhood. And in that moment, it was the only thing I needed to hear. It was the final signature on the contract. I nodded, slowly. Understood, I said. I placed my cloth napkin on the table. I did not throw it. I placed it. I slid out of the booth. Thank you for the dinner. It was very informative. Nora, don't you dare walk out, my father began. Nora, this is inappropriate, my mother hissed. But I was already walking. I didn't run. I walked, my back straight, my head held high, through the crowded, expensive restaurant and out the heavy glass doors. I stepped into the cold, crisp Idaho night. The air was thin and sharp. I walked to the corner, away from the valet. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The voice memo was still running. A recording of 2 hours and 17 minutes. I hit stop. I hit save. I named the file. Boise, symbolic. My hands were shaking, not from fear, not from sadness, from a wild, terrifying, electric surge of adrenaline. My phone rang in my hand. I looked at the screen. Graham. I almost didn't answer. I almost let the entire vibrating world fall into the darkness, but my thumb, acting on its own, accepted the call. Hey, I said. My voice was a reedy, thin thing. Nora, his voice was warm, a solid object from a different, saner universe. You sound far away. I am, I said. I'm in Boise. There was a pause, not a shocked pause, but a processing pause. Boise, he repeated. Okay, I'm in Seattle tonight. I just landed from New York, but I can be in Boise. It's a 3-hour drive if I leave now. Do you need me? The question, do you need me? Not what's wrong, not what happened. Just a simple logistical offer of presence. It broke me. The sob that ripped out of my chest was silent. A huge, shuddering intake of air. No, I whispered. No, stay in Seattle. Don't drive. Nora, what's going on? And I told him. I stood on a street corner in a city I didn't know, and I gave him the facts. I did not cry. I did not victimize myself. I delivered the report. My parents flew me here to a steakhouse. They invited me to dinner to inform me I've been written out of the family trust. My mother used the words, symbolic amount. My sister, who is newly married, made a surprise appearance to talk about her new house and the pool she's building. My father's final word to me was, dramatic. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I waited for him to say, that's awful, or I'm so sorry, or all the other useless platitudes. He did not. His voice, when it came, was so quiet I could barely hear it. It was full of a cold, slow anger that was more terrifying than any shouting. A symbolic amount. He said the words as if they were a curse. They're fools. Nora, they are absolute, unadulterated fools. Another pause. I could hear the sound of his apartment, the distant Seattle traffic. Listen to me, he said, his voice soft again, but firm. Go back to your hotel. Lock your door. Get on the first flight home tomorrow. I don't care what it costs. I'll book it if you want. Just come home. Home, I repeated. The word felt strange. Yes, home, to Seattle. And when you get here, we'll go to that terrible cafe with the good books. And then, Nora, we will build a room that you never, ever have to knock to enter. I closed my eyes. I leaned my head against the cold brick of the building beside me. The shaking had stopped. Okay, I whispered. I'll be on the first flight. Good, he said. I'll be waiting. I hung up. I ordered an Uber. I went back to my hotel. I did not look back. I flew back from Boise on the 6 a.m. flight. Graham was there, as promised. He didn't wait at the curb. He was inside, at the security exit, holding 2 cups of coffee. He didn't hug me. He didn't press for details. He just handed me one of the cups and said, "I figured you could use this. Welcome home. Nora." Home, that word again. This time, it felt a little less strange. For the next few weeks, the silence from my family was total. It was a cold, hard vacuum, but my life, for the first time, rushed in to fill it. The Aventech project was a beast, and I threw myself into it, my mind sharper and more focused than ever. My new authority at Northline felt earned. And then there was Graham. He was a quiet, consistent presence. We didn't fall into a desperate, clinging romance. We built something, slowly, with intention. We had dinners. We went to the Japanese bookstore and argued about jazz. We continued our conversation, the one that had started 4 hours long in a coffee shop. He never pushed about my family, but he left a space open. He had built the room he promised, and he was simply waiting for me to walk into it. About a month after Boise, he sent me a text on a Thursday. "I have a mandatory work-related social function this Saturday, Bainbridge Island. My friends are hosting a dinner. It will be full of pretentious, creative types who talk too much about semiotics. I can't face them alone. Save me." I laughed. "And I'm your shield? What's in it for me?" "Excellent food, and you get to watch me be socially awkward. Also, there's a ferry. You like ferries?" He was right. I did like ferries. "Fine," I typed. "I'll protect you from the semiotics." That Saturday, we took the 35-minute ferry ride from Seattle to Bainbridge Island. As the city skyline receded, the noise in my head went with it. Graham's friends lived in a house tucked into the woods, all cedar and glass and overflowing bookshelves. It was not a sterile mansion. It was a home, messy and warm, smelling of wood smoke and roasting garlic. His friends were, as promised, creative types. There was a woman named Elena, an editor for a literary quarterly, who had the most intelligent, assessing eyes I'd ever seen. There was a man named Ben, a musician who seemed to communicate primarily in wry observations, and his wife, a poet named Syra. I had come prepared for a test. I was Nora Whitfield, director of brand strategy. I had my armor on, my elevator pitch ready for who I was and what I did. I was ready to be analyzed, judged, and filed away. The test never came. They didn't ask me what I did. They asked me what I was reading. We sat around a massive, rough-hewn wooden table. Elena was talking about a new manuscript she was considering, a non-fiction book about the history of apologies. "The author's premise," she said, swirling her wine, "is that a bad apology is worse than no apology at all, that it's an act of aggression. It's not about remorse, it's about seizing the narrative." I felt a cold jolt, as if she had just read my father's email aloud. Ben laughed. "So, like, every corporate 'we're sorry for the inconvenience' email ever?" "Exactly," I heard myself say. The table quieted and looked at me. It was the first time I'd spoken. "In my world," I continued, finding my footing, "we call that reputational management. It's not an apology, it's a strategic maneuver to de-escalate a crisis. The goal isn't to be sorry. The goal is to be seen as sorry so the problem goes away." Elena's eyes sharpened. She put her glass down. "Go on." "Well, it's all about language. You never use the first person. You say, 'We regret that this happened,' not, 'We are sorry we did this.' You make the offense a passive, neutral event that just occurred. You remove your own agency from it. You remove the victim, too. Mistakes were made. It's a brilliant, sociopathic little piece of rhetoric." The room was silent. I flushed, suddenly terrified I had just done it again. I had been too intense, too Nora. I had ruined the mood. Then Elena, the editor, took a small black notebook from her pocket. She flipped to a new page. "Say that last part again," she said. "The part about removing the victim." I stared at her. She wasn't judging me. She was listening. You write that down," she said. "And you've got an essay. The Sociopathy of the Public Apology. I'd publish that tomorrow." "Graham," sitting next to me, just watched, a small, proud smile on his face. The conversation moved on, but I felt something shift inside me. I told them about the green tech pitch, about selling Choice, Ben, the musician, countered with a thought about how all great art is just a series of deliberate choices. For 2 hours, my ideas, the things I kept locked inside my work brain, were treated not as niche corporate strategies, but as culture, as philosophy. They were taken seriously. Later, as we were helping clear plates, Elena cornered me by the sink. "So, you're a strategist," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said. "But you write—" "Just copied taglines." She shook her head, those assessing eyes seeing far too much. "No, I saw how you talked about the blank page. You write, you just don't show it to anyone." She paused, drying a wineglass. "You write like you're standing outside the window of your own life, looking in. It's a great, lonely perspective. It makes for powerful, precise prose. But it's a hell of a way to live." I felt as if she had x-rayed my soul. I had no defense. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "You don't have to explain. But if you ever decide to write it down, I mean it. I want to read it." We were the last to leave. As we stood at the door saying goodbye, Ben clapped Graham on the shoulder. "So, you're serious about moving the fund's main office here? You're really leaving New York for this?" Graham, who was putting on his jacket, paused. He looked at me, just for a second, and then back at Ben. "Absolutely," he said, his voice easy. "New York is a great city, but all my future decisions are here." He smiled, and then he reached over and took my hand. "Elena, Syra, Ben, this is Nora, my partner in all future decisions." The words landed in the room with a quiet, solid weight. He didn't say my girlfriend. He didn't say my date. He said partner. My face flooded with heat. I'm sure I blushed. But I didn't look away. I just felt the solid, warm grip of his hand. It was an anchor. Sarah smiled. "Well, it's about time. Graham, it was lovely to meet you. Nora." We walked out into the cool, damp island night. The ferry ride back was late. After 11, the main cabin was mostly empty, but we went to the outdoor observation deck, even though a light, misty rain had begun to fall. The lights of Seattle were a glittering ribbon across the dark water. Graham held out a small, collapsible umbrella. It was barely big enough for one, but he held it over both of us. We stood side by side at the railing, the damp wood smelling of salt and rain, the thrum of the ferry's engine vibrating under our feet. "So," I said, my voice light, "partner in all future decisions. Huh? That's a new title." "Is it?" he said, looking out at the water. "It feels accurate." He turned to me, his expression serious, though his eyes were kind. "Did you feel them, Nora, listening to you?" "I did," I admitted. "It was new. They're good people. They know a real voice when they hear one. You've spent your whole life being told your voice is a problem. What if it's actually your superpower?" I had no answer to that. We stood in silence, the rain misting around us. "Nora," he said, his voice quieter, "you can stay in that place, you know, the one my friend Elena saw, the one outside the window. It's safe there. You're a brilliant observer, or you can come inside." He took a step, closing the small, cold space between us. "Your family sent you an email of rules," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Your mother sent you a text about what not to do. They're still trying to get you to ask for permission to exist." He was so close now I could feel the warmth from his jacket. "I have a question," he whispered, "and I want you to really think about it. Do you want to try living without asking permission anymore?" I looked up at him. The city lights were behind him, a blurred halo in the rain. This was it, the choice. "Yes," I said. He kissed me. It was not a dramatic, movie-set kiss. It was quiet. It was certain. It was the end of a long, cold silence. It tasted of coffee and salt air and smelled of damp wool and rain. It was a promise. And in that exact, perfect, private moment, a blinding light flashed in our eyes. We both jumped, pulling apart. "Oh, sorry. A tourist, a woman in a bright yellow rain slicker, was fumbling with her digital camera. "I had the flash on. I was just trying to get the skyline. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. "It's okay," Graham said, his voice steady, though he was clearly trying not to laugh. It looked so romantic," she said, bustling away in embarrassment. "A lovely picture." I looked at Graham, he looked at me, and we both broke into laughter. It was a shared, ridiculous, perfect moment. "Well," he said, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye, "our first accidentally documented public moment." "At least she thought we were romantic," I said, still smiling. The rest of the ride, I stood a little closer to him. When we got off the ferry, he held my hand. The following Monday, I had the big follow-up pitch for the Avantech stakeholders. This wasn't just about the rebrand, it was about the entire next 5-year strategy. I walked into the boardroom, but it wasn't just Nora Whitfield, director, who walked in. It was Nora Whitfield, partner. It was the woman who had been kissed on a ferry. It was the woman an editor had taken seriously. I threw out my first 10 slides. I stood up. I looked at the board of directors. "Good morning," I said. "You're here because you want a new brand. But you don't need a new logo. You don't need a new tagline. You need a new story. And you've been telling the wrong one for a decade." I didn't just give a presentation. I told a story. I told the story of my own life. The story of being trapped by an old narrative, of being told what you were worth, of the desperate, vital need to break out and define your own value. I just used their company as the protagonist. It was passionate. It was honest. It was, perhaps, a little dramatic. When I finished, there was a long silence. The CEO, a man notorious for checking his phone in meetings, was just looking at me, his hands steepled. He nodded once. "When can you start?" I didn't just win the contract, I won the account. That evening, Catherine called me into her office. "Nora," she said, "they didn't just love it. They said," and I quote, "she's the only one who told us the truth. They're not just signing for the 5-year plan. They want to fund a new, independent creative lab at Northline, and they want you to run it." I was stunned. A lab? A new division, your own team, your own budget, and, she said, leaning forward, your own P&L. Northline is offering you a percentage of the new project's net revenue. You're not just leading it. Nora, you're a partner. That word again. I walked back to my office. I closed the door. I sat in the quiet. The city lights of Seattle glittering outside. My city, my home. I picked up my phone. I sent a text to Theo. "Drinks tonight? My treat." His reply was instantaneous. "The pitch? How bad was it? Why are you paying?" I smiled. It was a home run. "Theo, they're offering me a percentage." "A percentage? A stake? Whitfield. I am on my way." I laughed and typed one more message, the one that mattered more. "And Theo, he's really okay." A pause. "Who, the CEO?" I looked at my screen, at the small, glowing words. "No," I typed. "Graham, he's really okay." The new division at Northline wasn't just a job, it was a fortress. I built it from the ground up, handpicking a team of 5, leasing a separate studio space in Pioneer Square, and spending 12-hour days submerged in the clean, logical, satisfying work of building something new. My name was on the door. My vision was on the whiteboard. My life, for the first time, was blessedly, wonderfully mine. Graham was a constant, solid presence. We built a life in the quiet spaces, late-night dinners after I finally left the studio, weekend trips to the San Juan Islands, arguments over whose turn it was to buy coffee. We were a functioning, adult partnership. The drama of Boise, the cold specter of my family, had receded, replaced by the thrum of a life I was actively, joyfully choosing. And then, as I knew it must, The past breached the walls. It didn't come as a phone call. It came, as so much of modern warfare does, through a screen. Theo was the one who found it. He walked into my new office, his face grim, and placed his phone on my desk. "Don't get mad at me for showing you this," he said. "But you're a strategist. You need to see the field." On the screen was a social media post from a woman I barely knew. A distant cousin named Deirdre, who I hadn't seen in over a decade. She was a professional Whitfield, someone whose entire identity was tied to the family name. She had posted a long, rambling blog entry on her platform. The title was "The Erosion of Family, a Modern Tragedy." It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It didn't mention me by name. It didn't have to. It spoke of certain generations who abandoned their roots and chased the hollow validation of the city. It lamented the pain of elders who are tossed aside for selfish ambition. But the key was in the first paragraph. "It is with a heavy heart that our family is watching the necessary restructuring of our shared legacy, the Whitfield Trust. It is a time for unity, to protect what is ours from those who would see it fractured for their own gain." The news of the trust restructuring leaked deliberately. "It's a warning shot. Nora," Theo said quietly, "they're building a public narrative. Loyal family members versus selfish outlier." "It's sloppy," I said. The cold, familiar calm of the strategist settled over me. "It's all emotion and no data. She's painting the family as a victim, which implies they're weak." "That's all you've got to say?" he asked, astonished. "What else is there to say? It's not for me. It's for them. It's an internal memo to rally their own troops." I was wrong. It was a warning shot, but it was just the opening salvo. 2 days later, the real attack came. A different relative, this time Aunt Judith, the one who had commented on Sabrina's wedding photos, tagged me directly. She tagged me in an article titled, "Honor Thy Father and Mother, The Crisis of Family Ethics in America." The post itself was short. Thinking of so many of us who are trying to hold families together in the face of such ingratitude, some people need to be reminded what truly matters. Nora Whitfield. Perhaps you remember this from Sunday school. My phone lit up. Friends from college, old colleagues, people from every corner of my life were seeing this. They were seeing me publicly, digitally shamed by my own family. I put my phone face down. My hands were shaking, but not with fear, with a cold, white-hot rage. "Don't," Graham said from my doorway. He had come to bring me dinner and had seen the notification light up my screen from across the room. "Don't what?" I said, my voice tight. "Don't reply. Don't engage. Don't correct the record. An aunt who posts that isn't looking for a conversation. She's looking for a fight. And you, Nora Whitfield, are not a bar fighter." I took a deep breath. He was right. I was a strategist. I would not let them drag me onto their battlefield. I would not let them dictate the terms of engagement. I picked up my phone. I untagged myself. I blocked Aunt Judith. I blocked Cousin Deirdre. I archived the post. I did not reply. My silence, my refusal to bleed publicly, was the only move. "Good," Graham said, putting the bag of food on my desk. "Now, eat. And then, I have an idea." His idea was named Diane. Graham's friend Diane, it turned out, was Diane Vance, the founder and chief executive officer of Aperture, a digital storytelling platform that was quickly becoming the most respected in the country. It was the anti-social media, a place for long-form, beautifully produced features on contemporary life. It was, in my own industry, a legend. We met at a quiet bar. Just the three of us. Diane was in her 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an aura of someone who did not suffer fools. She didn't just run a storytelling platform, she was a story hunter, just like Graham. "Graham told me about your situation," she said, skipping all pleasantries. "Not the details, just the theme, the locked door theme. He also told me you're a brand strategist." "I am," I said, wary. "Good. Then you understand this." She leaned forward. Aperture is doing a 6-part series. We're calling it The New Family. We're featuring a group of foster parents, a polyamorous household, a co-living startup, and a man who is legally attempting to adopt his best friend. She paused. We're missing a story. The story of the chosen family. The individual who redefines family not as the one they were born into, but as the one they build. Graham thinks you're that story. I was stunned. You want to interview me? About my family? God, no, she said, laughing. I don't want to hear about your aunt. I don't want to hear about your inheritance. That's their story. That's a boring, predictable, daytime television story. I want your story. I want the story of a professional woman who builds narratives for a living and who woke up one day and decided to build her own. I want the story of self-respect, of the journey. I looked at Graham. He was just watching me, his expression neutral. He had made the introduction. The decision was mine. I looked back at Diane. On 2 conditions, I said. She raised an eyebrow. One, we never use their names. My parents, my sister, they remain anonymous. This is not an exposé. Good, Diane said, nodding. Exposés are cheap? What's 2? 2. This isn't a story about a victim. It's not about what was done to me. It's about what I did next. It's a story about the strategy of self-worth. It's a case study. Diane's face broke into a wide, brilliant smile. A case study. I love that. You're a true strategist, aren't you? Deal. We start filming next week. The filming process was clinical, in the best way. Diane's team was small, precise, and respectful. They were, as I recognized, professionals. We filmed in 3 locations, the ones I had chosen. First, the Seattle Public Library. We sat in the vast, light-filled central atrium. This was my first home, I said, my voice echoing slightly. A place where your value was determined by your curiosity, not your last name. You could be anyone here. Second, we filmed on the Bainbridge Ferry. We stood on the windy deck, the city skyline I loved so much behind me. I used to see this as the view of the city I had to conquer, I said, the wind whipping my hair. A place I had to prove myself to, but I've learned that you don't have to conquer a home, you just have to choose it, and it has to choose you back. Finally, they filmed me in my new studio at Northline. I was at my whiteboard, surrounded by the metrics of my new life. Campaign data, project timelines, team schedules, my family's dinner table. It was a place with assigned seating, I said, holding a marker, my back to the empty board. And one day, I found my seat had been removed. I turned and wrote on the board in clean black letters, "Build a new table." So I did. It's a big table. It's a working table. It's not built on blood. It's built on respect, on shared vision, and on earned trust. And at this table, everyone has a seat, and no one can be uninvited. The feature was titled, The Architect, a Case Study in Self-Worth. It went live on a Tuesday. I didn't watch it. I couldn't. I approved the final cut, but I couldn't watch it. I went to the office, closed my door, and tried to work. By 10 a.m., my phone had to be turned off, not because of notifications, because it was literally overheating from the volume. By noon, Theo and my entire team had seen it. They were silent, respectful, and looked at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Theo just walked in, put a triple-shot latte on my desk, and said, Damn, Nora, that was good." By 3 p.m., the Aperture servers had crashed. Diane called me on my office line. "Nora," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "We're trending. We're not just trending. We have broken every record we have for engagement." Is that good? It's revolutionary, but don't look at the metrics. Go look at the comments. I, a person who knows to never read the comments, held my breath and clicked. They weren't comments. They were confessions. Thousands of them. My family told me I was too much my whole life. Today, I'm sending in my application to law school. Thank you for this. I was disowned 10 years ago. I've been calling myself an orphan ever since. Today, I'm calling myself an architect. Building my own table. Starting today. I'm sending this to my sister. Not the one from my family. The one who held my hand while I cried. On and on it went. A tidal wave of shared experience. I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't an outlier. I was, it turned out, a legion. I put my head down on my desk, and for the first time, I cried in my own office, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. The private reactions, however, were swift and predictable. The first was from Sabrina, a direct message sent at 4 p.m. "I see you're famous now." I didn't reply. Another message, 1 minute later. "I'm pregnant. 6 weeks. I'm telling you this privately because I'm sure you'll find a way to make it about you. Please, Nora, don't ruin this. Don't ruin the mood." The same old script, the same manipulative play. I'm pregnant. The human shield. Don't ruin the mood. The phantom accusation. I looked at the message. The old Nora would have replied in 1,000 ways, with anger, with hurt, with a desperate plea to be seen. The new Nora picked up her phone. She typed 2 words. "Take care." I hit send, then I blocked her. The second reaction came at 8 p.m. A text from my mother. It was not a congratulations. "Your father and I are very disappointed. Humility is always better than fame. You have chosen to air your grievances on a public stage, and you will find that stage a very cold and lonely place. You have forgotten who you are." It was followed by 3 separate links to articles on the virtues of modesty, the sin of pride, and the sacred duty of daughters. I deleted the text. I deleted the links. I did not reply. Graham found me that night at my desk, asleep, my head on my keyboard, the comments section still glowing on the screen. He didn't wake me. He just put a blanket over my shoulders. When I finally stirred, he was sitting in the chair opposite me, reading a book, his presence a silent, solid wall against the rest of the world. "They're proud of you. You know," I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. "Who? Your friends? Diane? Elena? Ben?" "They are," he said, not looking up. "But that's not why I'm here." "Why are you here?" He finally closed his book and looked at me. "Because you're doing this on your own terms. But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. I am the solid ground beneath your feet. Nora, I'm not here to fight your battles. I'm just here to make sure you have a place to stand while you do." I smiled, a real, tired, grateful smile. "Partner." "Partner?" he agreed. I was cleaning up, ready to finally go home. When the last email of the night arrived, it was not from a fan. It was not from my mother. The sender was from the law offices of Harlan, Price, and Whitfield, my father's firm. The subject line was, "Official Notice, Review of the Whitfield Family Trust." My blood went cold. I opened it. It was a formal, sterile, legal summons. "You are hereby notified to attend a mandatory review meeting of the Whitfield Family Trust. This meeting will be held in our offices on Friday, November 21st, at 10 a.m. Attendance is required for all named parties for the final disposition of assets." November 21st. It was 2 weeks away. It was also, I realized with a jolt, the exact day that Diane was scheduled to release the second feature in her series, the follow-up piece about the overwhelming public response to my story. My father, the strategist, had just made his countermove. He was trying to drag me from my public, protected stage back into his private, sealed courtroom, and he was timing it perfectly to kill my momentum. The game, I realized, was not over. It had just entered its final, legal, and most dangerous phase. The 2 weeks between my father's summons and November 21st were a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, I was the newly minted executive director of the National Aventech campaign. I was in strategy meetings for 10 hours straight, building a team, and approving budgets that made my old life look like a rounding error. My new studio was a whirlwind of energy, metrics, and the clean, exhilarating scent of success. By night, I was a quiet, cold strategist, reviewing my own files, the voice memo from Boise, the emotional discipline email. I was preparing for a different kind of pitch. Graham was my anchor. He didn't ask what my plan was. He just kept my refrigerator stocked and made sure I slept, bringing me tea at 2 a.m. when he found me at my laptop. "You're going into his arena," he'd said one night. "Remember, the arena is his home field advantage. Don't play his game. Play yours." On the morning of the 21st, I dressed for war, not in armor, but in my best Northline case study self. A sharp, navy blue sheath dress, understated jewelry. My hair was pulled back. I looked like what I was, an executive with evaluation. The offices of Harlan, Price, and Whitfield were designed to intimidate, 45 floors up, overlooking the Sound, all glass and brushed steel and whispering, expensive silence. I was shown into the main conference room, and the first tactical move was clear. My father was not there. Mr. Harlan, a man I'd never met but who radiated senior partner, sat at the head of the table. My mother was to his right, looking brittle, her hands clutching a black leather handbag in her lap, and beside her, Sabrina. She was visibly pale, her pregnancy now a small, defined bump that she kept a protective hand over. They had brought her, the human shield, the living, breathing reason for fairness. "Ms. Whitfield," Harlan began, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "We are here today as a formality to review the final disposition of the Whitfield Family Trust." I said nothing. I just waited. I was not a daughter. I was a stakeholder in a meeting I had not called. "The trustees," he continued, "your parents, have a fiduciary duty to protect the trust from all liabilities, internal and external. To that end, they have recently enacted the Beneficiary Responsibility Clause, Section 32. He slid a single, bound document across the polished mahogany table. The clause states that any beneficiary who takes public action in any media that is deemed detrimental to the family's reputation or subversive to the trust's stated goals forfeits their voting rights on all discretionary matters. He looked up from the paper, his eyes sterile. "Your recent, widely publicized feature on the Aperture platform has been deemed, by a unanimous vote of the trustees, as a clear and egregious violation of this clause. As of 10 a.m. this morning, your status has been moved to passive, non-voting beneficiary. You will receive your symbolic disbursement as previously discussed, but you will have no further say in the trust's direction." The room was silent. My mother was studying the wood grain of the table as if it were the most interesting thing she had ever seen. Sabrina was avoiding my gaze, her hand moving in small, nervous circles on her stomach. This was it, the checkmate. They had weaponized my success. They had used the very voice I had just found as the legal justification to silence me. The old Nora would have cried. She would have screamed, "This is unfair!" The strategist just nodded. "I see," I said. My voice was calm, almost quiet. It sounded unnaturally loud in the pressurized room. Harlan, I noted, looked momentarily thrown. He had come prepared for tears. He was not prepared for my lack of drama. "Mr. Harlan," I said, leaning forward slightly, "as I am still a beneficiary, even a passive one, I assume I have the right to review the full, unsummarized bylaws of the trust. I'd like a copy of the full PDF, including all amendments. Now, please." Harlan bristled. "Ms. Whitfield, this is a 200-page document. It is highly complex." "I'm a strategist. I'll manage," I said. "The PDF." A paralegal, who had been sitting in the corner like a piece of furniture, stiffly brought a tablet and placed it in front of me. I opened the file. I did not read it. I went to the search bar. My mother and sister were watching me, a strange, creeping anxiety entering their expressions. This was not on their script. I did not search for my name. I did not search for symbolic. I searched for Evelyn. My maternal grandmother, Evelyn Reed, the woman who had taught me to read, who smelled of lavender and old paper, who had been the quiet, subversive heart of the family, She had died 2 years ago. The search function pinged. One hit, an amendment. Section 12C, added just over 2 years ago, right before her last illness. Section 12-C, the clause for the preservation of origin. My pulse, which had been slow and steady, gave a single, hard kick. I read the text. It was pure Evelyn. It was not written by my father's lawyers. It was written by her. It stated, in clear poetic language, that the cultural assets of the Whitfield Evelyn estate, defined specifically as the historic Reed family home in Savannah, the entire contents of the family library, and all personal archives and manuscripts, were to be managed entirely separately from the liquid assets of the trust. And then, the payload. The stewardship of these cultural assets shall be granted, exclusively and with full, indivisible authority, to the one grandchild who, in the final 5 years of my life, remained in consistent weekly contact. Consistent contact is defined as, at minimum, one substantive, non-prompted telephone call or letter per week. Sabrina, the golden child, had been too busy with her sorority, her debut, her wedding planning. I had not. My Sunday. 4 p.m. call with Grandma Evelyn had been my lifeline. I had done it for 10 years, not for an inheritance, but for a sanctuary. I had the phone records to prove it. I looked up from the tablet. "Mr. Harlan," I said, my voice still quiet, but now it had an edge. "I have a question about Section 12C. My mother's head snapped up. Her face was no longer just nervous. It was ashen. Sabrina was now looking directly at me, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. That clause," Harlan stammered, shuffling his papers. He clearly knew what it was. "That is a minor, sentimental provision." "It doesn't seem minor," I said, sliding the tablet across the table. "It seems to grant full, exclusive control of the Savannah estate and the entire Reed Library to a single steward. I am that steward. I'm sure my weekly calls, which I made from the day I went to college until the day she died, are a matter of record." "Now, Nora," my mother said, her voice a high, strained thing, "your grandmother was very old. She was not herself when she wrote that. She was herself enough to have it notarized and entered into the trust. Mother, I'm sure my father's own firm reviewed it for legality." And as I said his name, I saw him, my father. He was standing in the doorway of the conference room, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. He had been listening the whole time. His face was not triumphant. It was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "And," I continued, feeling a sudden, strange jolt of memory, "I believe she made further provisions." I stood up. I looked past my mother, past Harlan, and directly at my father in the doorway. 2 years ago, just after adding this amendment, my grandmother Evelyn deposited a sealed, notarized box with her personal attorney at the firm of Taggart and Marsh. Not your firm. Father, hers. She told me she was doing it. She gave me a letter confirming my right to it. I took a breath. Her instructions were very clear. The box was to be opened upon her death, or at the sole, absolute discretion of me, her steward, if, and I quote, "things went too far." I let the words hang in the air. "I believe," I said, "that too far has been definitively reached, as of 10 a.m. this morning. In fact, this is irrelevant," my father said, his voice a low growl. "A theatrical, sentimental distraction." "Is it?" I countered. "It's a legal directive, tied to a binding clause. I am formally requesting, as the sole executor of Section 12-C, that the sealed package from Evelyn Reed Whitfield be retrieved from Taggart and Marsh and be opened in the presence of all named beneficiaries." "This is a delay tactic, a stunt," my father snapped, pushing off the doorframe. "It's my right," I said. "And since we are all so concerned with public appearances in the family name, I'd like to schedule the opening. I know we're all very busy." I pulled out my phone, as if checking my schedule. "Let's see. The Seattle Cultural Heritage Gala is next Thursday night. You have a table, I believe. The Whitfield Family Foundation table. Such a lovely philanthropic evening. How about we schedule the opening for, say, 2 p.m.? Next Thursday. Right here. It's best we get all the legalities sorted out before a big public event. We wouldn't want any unresolved issues, would we? Sabrina made a small, choked sound. My mother looked like she was going to faint. My father's face was a study in pure, unadulterated rage. I had just taken his own tactics, leverage, timing, public image, and turned them into a weapon he couldn't counter. "I'll see you all next week," I said. Picking up my purse, I nodded at Mr. Harlan. "This meeting, I believe, is concluded." I walked out of that office. I did not run. I walked, my footsteps silent on the expensive carpet. I got in the elevator, descended the 45 floors, and stepped out into the bright, clear Seattle afternoon. The air had never tasted so good. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Theo. "Theo, call me, right now. Catherine is doing backflips. She's looking for you." I ducked into a coffee shop, my hands shaking slightly, and called him. "Theo, I'm busy." "No, you're not. The Aventech campaign? The one you built? It didn't just win an award, it just got benchmarked by the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal. They're calling it the new gold standard in tech branding. Catherine just got off a call with the board. They're not considering you. They're moving you. They're greenlighting the national expansion. Effective immediately. Your creative lab? It's going national. Nora, they want to make you an executive vice president. This isn't just a seat at the table. They're making you a partner." I sat down on a hard metal chair. Executive vice president. Partner. My father had just tried to strip me of a symbolic inheritance from a family I didn't belong to. My real family, my Northline family, was offering me an empire. I understood, in that moment, the difference. One was power based on blood and control. The other was power I had earned. "Nora?" Theo's voice was in my ear. "Are you crying? Don't cry, it's weird." "I'm not crying," I said, a strange, breathless laugh bubbling up. "I'm accepting. Tell Catherine yes. I accept. I'll lead it." I hung up and met Graham for dinner. I told him everything. The clause, the box, the gala, the job. He listened, his face thoughtful. When I finished, he just raised his wineglass. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "My grandmother always said you save the best keys for the right doors." He tapped his glass against mine. "Looks to me like you're about to open a different door." Nora Whitfield. The night before the opening of the box, I couldn't sleep. The second Aperture feature had gone live that morning, the one about the community response, and my inbox was a waterfall of gratitude. I was at the peak of my professional life. But I was pacing my apartment, the rain lashing against the 23rd floor glass. Graham was in the armchair, reading, a silent, comforting anchor. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor," he said, not looking up. "I'm not afraid," I said, which was a lie. He looked up then. "I know. You're not afraid of losing. You've already proven you can win. You're afraid you'll see your sister's face, or your mother's, and you'll soften. You're afraid that after all this, your compassion is the one weapon they still have that works." I stopped pacing. He had seen it. The one crack in my armor. "I've built this entire life. Graham," I whispered. "My job, my team, this, it's all built on me not being that weak. Crying girl at the dinner table. What if I walk in there tomorrow, and she's the one who shows up?" He closed his book. He stood, walked over to me, and took my cold hands in his warm ones. "Nora," he said, "your compassion isn't a weakness. It's your entire superpower. It's why you called your grandmother. It's why your team would follow you into a fire. It's why those people are writing to Aperture. It's not a flaw. It's the whole damn point." He put his hand on my cheek. "Don't be afraid of being the person who feels. Be afraid of being the people who make someone feel, and then feel nothing. You've already won. Nora, tomorrow is just the paperwork." I leaned into his hand. Closing my eyes, he was right. Tomorrow wasn't a battle. It was a transfer of assets, the real inheritance, the one that mattered. I already had. We walked into the conference room at Harlan, Price, and Whitfield at 2 p.m. on the dot. The atmosphere was not just tense, it was Arctic. My father was already there, standing at the head of the table, not sitting, asserting his dominance over the space. My mother and Sabrina were in the same seats as before, like porcelain dolls set for a grim tea party. Sabrina, I noted, looked pale and resentful. Graham was with me. He wore a quiet, dark suit, and he looked less like a romantic partner and more like an extremely expensive corporate advisor. He didn't sit at the table. He took a chair against the back wall, opened a notebook, and waited. His silent, professional presence was 1,000 times more intimidating than any legal team, and I could see it unnerved my father. A new woman was in the room. She was sharp, in her 60s, and had the clear, unimpressed eyes of someone who had seen men like my father her entire life. She introduced herself. "I'm Arlene Taggart. I was Evelyn Reed's personal attorney for 20 years. She placed a simple gray archival box on the mahogany table. It was sealed with 2 deep blue wax seals, stamped with an R signet. "This is the package deposited by Evelyn Reed Whitfield on October 4th, 2021, Ms. Taggart stated, her voice cutting through the silence. Her instructions were clear. It is to be opened by the named steward, Nora Whitfield, in the presence of the other named beneficiaries, at a time of the steward's choosing. It appears," she glanced at my father, "that time is now." She slid the box toward me, along with a silver letter opener. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked at the box. This was not a weapon. It was a key. I slit the first seal, then the second. The sound of the cracking wax was the only noise in the room. I lifted the lid. There was no gold, no jewelry. It was not a treasure box. It was, as I had suspected, a story box. On top lay a thick, heavy, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on it in my grandmother's looping, elegant script, Nora. Beneath it was a professionally bound proposal, the kind I had seen in publishing meetings. The title read, "The Reed Archives, A History," and beneath that was a small, unassuming USB drive. I picked up the letter. "Read it aloud," my father commanded from the end of the table. "If this is a legitimate legal document, it is for all beneficiaries." "She will do as she chooses," Ms. Taggart said, not even looking at him. I looked at my father, then at my mother, then at Sabrina, and I made a decision. They needed to hear it. I broke the seal on the envelope. The paper was thick, and it smelled faintly, impossibly, of lavender and old books. "My dearest Nora," I began, my voice clear and steady. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means the accountants have finally taken over the library. I am so very sorry, my dear. I am sorry that a family built on stories has been reduced to a ledger." I paused. My mother looked down. My father's jaw was tight. "I have watched you, my girl." I continued reading. "My observer, my listener, I have watched you try to earn a seat at a table where you were the only one who bothered to learn the names of the people who said it. Your sister, God love her, sees the world as a stage. Your parents see it as a balance sheet. You, Nora, were the only one who saw it as a story. I knew this day would come. They have been trying to liquidate the Reed legacy, my legacy, for 30 years, to turn it into cash. They do not understand that some things are worth more than money. So 2 years ago, I made a provision. Section 12, C, our little secret. You, my dear, were the only one who called, every Sunday, for 10 years, rain or shine, exams or new jobs. You called, you listened, you are the steward of our stories, and so, I have made you the steward of their home. This box contains my life's work. It is the manuscript of the Reed family history, from our arrival in Savannah in 1790 to the present day. The USB drive contains the digital copy and all my research. The proposal is for its formal donation to the Savannah Literary Museum. I have already been in correspondence with their board. The project is now yours. You are the sole executor, editor, and authorized representative. But an archive needs a home, and a home, my dear, needs to be protected, especially from its own family. The Reed Conservation Fund has been established. It is seeded with my own personal investments. The money I brought into this marriage, the money your grandfather, not your father, helped me grow. It is entirely, irrevocably separate from the Whitfield Trust. This fund is tied, legally and permanently, to the Savannah Estate and the Reed Library. Its sole purpose is to maintain the house, the grounds, and the archive in perpetuity. The house cannot be sold, the library cannot be broken up, and the endowment cannot be liquidated for any other purpose. I stopped reading. Sabrina made a small, gasping sound. It was the sound of a balloon popping. "The house?" she whispered, her voice a thin, childish wail. "The house?" She turned to my mother, her face, which had been pale, now flooding with an ugly, blotchy red. "You said we'd get the house. You promised. My pictures. I wanted to redo my wedding photos in the garden, the ones Nora ruined by not being there." The accusation was so absurd, so nakedly selfish. It defied logic. She wasn't crying for our grandmother. She was crying for a photo opportunity. "Sabrina, hush," my mother hissed, her eyes darting toward the conference room door. "Be quiet. This is not the place." "No," Sabrina sobbed, her voice rising. "She gets everything. She gets the attention. She gets the new job. And now she gets the house too? It's not fair." As if on cue. A muffled commotion started outside the glass doors to the hallway. A light flashed, then another, a reporter's voice, muffled but clear. "Mr. Whitfield, are the rumors of the trust being contested true?" My father's plan to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. Someone, either from his firm or my aunt's social circle, had leaked the meeting, and now the press was here, right on time for the family implosion. My mother looked at the door, her face a mask of pure panic. My father looked trapped. This was their worst nightmare. Not a private loss, but a public humiliation. I looked down at the letter in my hands, at the last paragraph my grandmother had written. I was not gleeful. I was not triumphant. I just felt a deep, profound sadness, and then a great, cleansing calm. "Nora," my mother pleaded, her voice a low, desperate whisper. "Please, think of the family name. Don't make a scene." "I'm not the one making a scene, Mother," I said, my voice quiet. But it cut through Sabrina's sobs. "But I will finish the letter." I stood up. I looked at all of them. The three people who had formed the wall I had spent my life trying to climb. "My grandmother left one final note," I said. "I think it's the only one that truly matters." I read her words into the silence. "They will tell you that you are not owed anything. They are correct, but they are wrong about what anything is. Love is not a performance bonus. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is not an asset to be distributed based on compliance. It is a fact, or it is nothing. Do not let them convince you that your fact is not real." The room was utterly still. Ms. Taggart, the lawyer, was smiling, a small, satisfied smile. Graham, from the back wall, stood up. He walked to my side. He didn't look at my family. He didn't say a word. He just put his hand on the table next to mine, and then, very slowly, covered my hand with his. It was not a gesture of rescue. It was a gesture of solidarity, a warm, solid, physical statement. "I am here. You are not alone." The shaking in my hand, which I hadn't even noticed, stopped. Mr. Harlan, my father's lawyer, cleared his throat, his professionalism fraying at the edges. "This is highly irregular, a sentimental provision. However, it does not change the facts. This separate endowment has no bearing on the Whitfield Family Trust. The trustees' vote regarding Section 32 is legal. Ms. Whitfield's status as a passive, non-voting beneficiary of the main trust stands. I know, I said. He can keep it. This is a farce, my father finally exploded. The control was gone. His face was dark with rage. A circus. You think you can come in here. You think you can. You wave this letter around? He was gesturing wildly, his voice rising. The reporters outside heard it, and the shouting in the hall grew louder. You bring this man, he spat, gesturing at Graham, into my offices? You bring reporters to my door? You do this theatrical stunt to steal from your own sister? Steal what, father? I asked, my voice still quiet. A house she wanted for a photo op? You're angry because Grandma Evelyn left her stories to the only person who bothered to listen to them. You're angry because she trusted a storyteller, not an accountant. He took a step toward me, his face inches from mine. You were always the problem. Nora, always. This family does not need you. We don't need you at Christmas. We don't need you at Thanksgiving. And we certainly don't need you at any more parties. You are done here. The final excommunication. The words he had wanted to say for 30 years, now finally spoken. I looked at him, at this small, angry man, and I felt nothing, no fear, no pain, just a vast, empty pity. The audio recorder app on my phone, which had been running in my pocket since I stepped into the elevator, had just captured its final, perfect piece of evidence. I turned from my father, I picked up the letter, the proposal, and the USB drive, and placed them carefully in my bag. I left the box. I'll be in touch with Mr. Harlan, I said to Ms. Taggart. We have a foundation to establish. I turned to my mother, who was now weeping into her hands, and to Sabrina, who was just staring, hollow-eyed, at the empty box. And then I looked back at my father. I wish you all peace, I said. I turned and walked out of the room. Graham's hand was on the small of my back, a solid, guiding pressure. We walked out of the conference room, past the stunned paralegals, and into the hallway, which was now a chaotic mess of cameras and microphones. The reporters surged, shouting my father's name. Graham shielded me with his body. We didn't run. We walked, moving through the chaos as if it were simply a weather system we had to pass through. We didn't answer a single question. We didn't have to. We left them all behind, trapped in that glass room, with the empty box, the ringing phones, and the flashing lights of the public humiliation they had built for me, and which had, in the end, become their own, after the storm of the trust meeting. I expected to feel victorious. I did not. I felt empty. The fight was over. The case was closed. But I was still the woman standing in the hallway, outside the room. I had proven my value, but I was still alone. Graham seemed to understand this. He didn't try to celebrate. He didn't analyze the win. He just gave me space, and he kept showing up. About a month later, on a still, clear, cold December evening, he told me we were having dinner. He didn't say where. He just told me to wear a warm coat. He drove us not to a restaurant, but to a small, private dock on Lake Union. An old, beautiful wooden boat, polished to a dark gleam, was waiting. A friend owes me a favor, he said, helping me aboard. There was no crew, just him. He piloted the boat himself, slowly, out into the middle of the lake. The water was like black glass, reflecting the entire glittering, cold skyline of Seattle. It was silent, except for the low thrum of the engine and the lap of water against the hull. I was huddled in my coat, watching the lights. He cut the engine. The silence was absolute. Do you remember the first night we talked? He asked, his voice quiet, coming up beside me at the railing. I do, I said. 3 a.m., the smell of rain. And you said peace, he continued, was not having to prove your value to anyone. I remember thinking, that is a peace worth finding. He looked at me, his face serious in the reflected city light. I don't think peace is a place you find. Nora, I don't think it's a room you're given. I think it's a house you build. And you've built the strongest, most beautiful one I've ever seen. But I don't want to just visit anymore. He reached into his coat pocket. He didn't kneel. He just stood there, with me, on the water, between the city and the sky. He opened a small, dark box. It was not a giant, blinding diamond. It was not a statement. It was a ring from another time, a deep, clear, cornflower blue sapphire, classic and elegant, set in an old, simple platinum band. It was a piece of history. It was a story. My grandmother's, he said quietly, the one who loved the good keys. She said it was for a woman who understood the difference between value and price. Nora Whitfield, will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner, in this life, in all the decisions, in the house we build together? My father had demanded I ask for permission. Graham was asking for my permission. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about my family, or the inheritance, or the fight. I just thought, home. Yes, I said. My voice was as clear and as steady as the water. Yes, absolutely, yes. We didn't want a long engagement. We had both had enough drama. What we wanted was a celebration, a quiet, joyful, and deeply personal event. My sister's wedding had been an opulent, public performance for 500 people. Ours would be a private gathering for 60. We chose a venue not for its grandeur, but for its feeling. We found a small, historic estate in the Cascade foothills, an hour east of the city. It was an old lodge, built of stone and dark wood, surrounded by a grove of ancient, towering maple trees. It felt solid. It felt permanent. The guest list was the easiest part. We didn't have to debate. I took a piece of paper and I wrote down the name of every person who had, in the past year, seen me. Not the version of me I performed, but the real one. Theo, Catherine from Northline, Elena, the editor, and her husband Ben, Sarah, the poet, Diane Vance, my team from the Creative Lab, Graham's small, core group of authors and friends, 60 people, a chosen family. When I called Diane to tell her, she shrieked, then went into professional mode. Wait, she said. I'm sending a bottle of champagne, but also a request. What's that? Aperture. We have to do the follow-up, but not the wedding. I don't want the wedding. That's yours. I want the story. The final chapter in the series. The architect. We did the case study. We did the community. This is the foundation. A warm, quiet feature. Not on the wedding, but on the principle of it. The principle of building your own family. No names, no drama, just the philosophy. I agreed. It felt right. It felt like the correct, quiet end to the public part of the story. My father, I knew, would have had a groomsman, a best man, a rigid, hierarchical structure. I had Theo. I found him in the Northline break room, trying to fix the espresso machine. Theo, I said, I need you to do something for me in March. It requires a suit. Ugh, a suit? Is this another awards dinner? Because last time, the CEO of Aventech cornered me and talked about his boat for 45 minutes. I can't. Nora, I'm fragile. It's my wedding, I said. I need a witness for the vows. He stopped, the little metal filter in his hand. He looked at me, and for the first time in our friendship, Theo, my human bullshit detector, looked genuinely, completely floored. Whitfield, he said, his voice a little thick. A witness? Yeah, I can wear a suit for that. I'll even shave. We didn't send paper invitations that cost $7 apiece. We sent a simple digital card, designed by one of the creatives in my lab. It had an illustration of the Cascade Mountains, and beneath it, a single line of text. To those who have seen me, please come. The RSVPs were not just yes, they were stories. They were, we wouldn't miss this for the world. They were, I am crying at my desk. 2 weeks before the wedding, one final email breached my firewall. It was a new address, a generic one, but I knew the sender. The subject line was, your continued disregard. It was a long, scrolling manifesto, a perfect sequel to the one my father had sent before. It was a detailed, bullet-pointed list of my failings, my tawdry public feature, my disgraceful legal coup, my theft of my grandmother's house, my arrogance in getting engaged without their blessing. It was a symphony of their perceived victimhood. It ended with one, final, desperate command. You are blemish on this family's name. You are embarrassing your parents. We demand you stop this. Demand. That word? I stared at the email. The old Nora would have been devastated. The old Nora would have seen it as a final, fatal rejection. The new Nora, Executive Vice President Nora, Partner Nora, just deleted it. I was busy. I was in the middle of a much more important, much more difficult task. I was trying to choose the perfect first dance song. I was debating between an old Miles Davis track, as a nod to Graham's terrible jazz, and something by the National. I didn't have time for them. The wedding day arrived. It was a clear, cold Saturday in March. The mountain air was so crisp it hurt to breathe, but the sun was a bright, watery gold. I didn't have bridesmaids. I just had my friends, Elena and Diane and Syra, who helped me get ready in one of the lodge's simple, wood-paneled rooms. My dress was simple, long-sleeved, and made of a heavy, beautiful cream-colored wool. When I was ready, Theo knocked on the door. He was in a perfectly tailored blue suit, and he looked uncharacteristically nervous. "Wow, Whitfield," he said. "You clean up." "So do you, Theo," I said, smiling. "They're all there," he said. "All 60 of them. They're waiting." He offered me his arm. "Ready to go build a table?" "More than ready," I said. We walked out. The ceremony was in the grove of maple trees. Our 60 guests were not seated in rows. At my request, they were standing in a small, tight, concentric circle, a human windbreak against the cold. Graham was waiting for me. He was in a dark green suit, and he wasn't looking at me with tears in his eyes. He was looking at me with that same, steady, assessing, 4-hour coffee smile, the I see you smile. We stood in the middle of our friends. It was a vow, but it was also a business meeting, and a strategy session, and the most important pitch of our lives. Theo stood beside me, as my witness. Graham spoke first. His vows were about books, and stories, and the quiet, steady work of building. And then it was my turn. I looked at this man, this kind, sane, brilliant man who had offered me a partnership, not a rescue. "Graham," I said, my voice clear in the cold air. "I have spent my entire life trying to find the right words. I built a career on it. I have been looking for the perfect brand, the perfect tagline, the perfect way to explain what I am worth. I took his hands, and then I met you, and you never asked me to explain. You never asked me to pitch. You just listened. You didn't give me a home. You are the home. You are the room I never have to knock to enter. You are the house I don't need a key for." We were married. There was no dance floor, no band. We just had a long, incredible dinner around a single, massive wooden table in the lodge's great room. There was a roaring fire, and wine, and conversation. It was the Bainbridge dinner, magnified. It was my new, official, 60-person family. The next day, Diane's final feature went live. It was, as she promised, quiet. It was just me and Graham, walking on the ferry, sitting in the library. It was about our principles. It was a simple philosophical piece about what it means to build a life. It was not a viral sensation, but it spread, slowly and powerfully. It was shared by people who, like me, were not looking for drama, but for a blueprint. The one quote that was repeated, the one that showed up in blogs and on feeds, was not mine. It was Diane's closing narration. In the end, the new family is not a rebellion. It is a revelation. It is the quiet, radical, and grown-up decision that you do not need anyone's permission to be happy. My life after that was good. It was busy. The national campaign was a success. My team expanded. I was offered a position teaching a graduate-level workshop at the university, not just on strategy, but on my new, unified theory, narrative as healing, how to rebrand your own story. My grandmother's foundation was established. I flew to Savannah, not to fight, but to build. The house was in disrepair, but I hired a curator, and we began the long, satisfying work of turning her archives into a public resource. One night, Graham and I were at home, our home, a simple, modern place we'd bought in Queen Anne. I was going over the foundation's accounting, and I was confused. "Graham," I said, "I don't understand this. The initial seed money from my grandmother was significant, but the matching funds, the ones that came in from her anonymous donor, they didn't just match, they quintupled it. This is an enormous amount of money." Graham didn't look up from his book. He was at his desk. I was at mine. We worked in the same room. "Yes," he said, "the endowment is now fully, permanently solvent. It will outlive us both." "But who was it?" I asked, frustrated. "Ms. Taggart won't tell me. The bank won't tell me. It's just a private philanthropic fund." He put a bookmark in his book. He turned in his chair. "It was me, Nora." I stared at him. "What?" "Well, my family's fund, technically, the one I manage. I told you, I invest in stories, and your grandmother's was the best I'd read in a decade. It was a sound investment. I'm a publisher, remember?" I looked at him, the man with the 10-minute slow watch, the man who wore old wool jackets. "Graham," I said, I've never asked you. You show up, you have a fund. How much money do you have?" He laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Nora, it's not a secret. I never thought it was the most interesting part of the conversation. It's a lot. My grandfather didn't just leave me a watch. He left me a publishing house, the one he built, the one I sold to a major conglomerate when I was 28. The investing part is just what I do with it." He saw the look on my face. He got up, came over, and crouched beside my desk. "Hey," he said, taking my hand. "Listen to me. It's just money. It's paper. It's a tool. It's a foundation. It's not the house. You and I, we are the house. This," he tapped the bank statement, "is just the concrete. It's the floor, not the content. It's there to make sure the walls never, ever shake. That's all." I looked at him, the last, final, missing piece of my old narrative clicking shut. My family had used money as a weapon, as a tool of control, as a measure of love. To Graham, it was just concrete. "Okay," I said, a slow smile spreading. "The foundation is solid, then, as a rock," he said, and he kissed me. "Now, are you done with the ledgers? I was thinking we should try that new jazz club. I'm still convinced I can make you a Coltrane fan." "Not a chance," I said, closing the laptop. "But you can buy me a drink?" The Seattle Cultural Heritage Gala was the biggest philanthropic event of the winter, held at the Museum of History and Industry. The main atrium was a cavern of glass and steel, reflecting the lights of the boats moving on the dark, still water of Lake Union. It was a room I knew well from corporate events, but tonight was different. I was not there as a vendor, a strategist, or a guest. I was the guest of honor, the keynote speaker, the founder of the Evelyn Reed Unconditional Love Archive. Graham was at my side, his hand warm at the small of my back. He looked absurdly, effortlessly elegant in a classic tuxedo, the only hint of his true self being the scratched, vintage watch peeking from his cuff. We were a team. He was my partner, my husband, my concrete. We were sipping champagne, greeting Diane and Elena, when a sudden hush fell over the crowd near the entrance. The press cameras, which had been lazily documenting the arrival of city council members, suddenly flashed in a frenetic, concentrated burst. I felt Graham stiffen beside me, a second before I saw them. My family. My father, in a tuxedo that was a size too tight, looking imperious. My mother, in a stiff, powder blue gown, her face a mask of strained nobility, and Sabrina, clutching her husband's arm, her pregnancy prominent, her eyes darting around the room, searching for the nearest camera. They were not on the guest list. "They're not here for you, Nora," Graham murmured in my ear, his voice a low, steady rumble. "They're here for them. They're trying to repair their image." Of course, the Whitfield Family Foundation table, the one my father had booked months ago, the one I had assumed they would abandon in shame after the scene at the law office, but I had underestimated his audacity. He wasn't retreating. He was counterattacking, performing the role of the proud, philanthropic patriarch, publicly supporting the very archive that had been taken from him. I was scheduled to speak at 8 o'clock. At 7:45, I made my way toward the backstage green room to review my notes. I felt a hand grasp my elbow. It was not a gentle touch. It was a summons. "Nora?" My father. He had pulled me into a curtained-off catering alcove, the smell of warming trays thick in the air. He looked smaller, his anger a brittle, dry thing under the bright lights. "I don't know what you're planning to say out there," he hissed, his voice a low, courtroom threat. "But this event is for the Whitfield name, our name. The press is everywhere. Do not mention the letter. Do not mention your grandmother's delusions. We are here to support this foundation, and you will not embarrass us by airing private business. It is bad for the family image." I looked at him. I looked at this man who was still, after everything, trying to direct a play that had already closed. The old fear, the old sting of his disapproval, was just gone. I was not his audience anymore. I smiled. It was a calm, polite, boardroom smile. "Hello, Father. I think you're mistaken. Tonight isn't about the Whitfield image." I gently removed my elbow from his grasp. "Tonight is about my grandmother's story. You should find your seat. I hear the acoustics in here are excellent." I left him standing alone by the hot plates. At 8 o'clock, the museum's director introduced me. "And now," she said, her voice warm, "a woman who has done more than just preserve a legacy. She has created a new one, a force in the branding world, but more importantly, the visionary founder of the Evelyn Reed Archive. Please welcome Nora Whitfield." I walked onto the stage. The applause was warm, a sea of faces I knew, and many I didn't. I saw Graham in the front row, his gaze steady. I saw Diane and Theo and my whole team, grinning. And I saw them, my family, seated at a prominent table near the front. My father's face a thundercloud. My mother smiling a terrifying, fixed smile for the cameras. The director joined me at the podium. "Nora, in your Aperture feature, you spoke so movingly about the chosen table. You have 3 minutes. Tell this audience what that means for the archive you've built." This was it, the final pitch. I stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you," I said, my voice clear, not a tremor. "The chosen table is a simple idea. It's the belief that your value is not determined by the seat you are given, but by the one you build. My grandmother, Evelyn Reed, was an architect of such tables." I reached into the small clutch bag I was carrying. She left me many things, her stories, her house, but she also left me one final envelope. She told me to open it when the foundation was, in her words, truly ready. I think it's ready. I pulled out a single, thick, cream-colored envelope, the same kind she had used for her first letter. I opened it. "This isn't a letter," I said, pulling out the single sheet. "It's a legal memorandum, from her personal attorney. It's a final gift." I looked out at the crowd. My grandmother was a quiet, brilliant investor. This memo confirms that when she established the Reed Conservation Fund, she had already, in secret, set aside her own separate funds to match, dollar for dollar, every donation it ever received. A gasp went through the room. "But it also notes," I continued, "that a second, anonymous matching grant was established just days after her own, a second, identical fund, set up by a donor who believed in her story just as much as she did. A donor who wanted to ensure that this archive, this story of unconditional love, would be solvent forever. The room was silent, all eyes on me. "It is my incredible privilege," I said, "to announce that the Evelyn Reed Archive, as of tonight, is now one of the most significant and fully endowed cultural archives in the state of Washington, and it is because that anonymous donor is in the room tonight." I paused. I let the silence hang, and then I looked right at the front row. "That donor," I said, my voice breaking just a little, "is my husband, Graham Pierce." A wave of shock rolled through the room. Graham, the quiet publisher, the man known for his love of old books, was not known for this. He simply stood up, as I had asked him to, from his seat. A ripple of applause started, then built into a thunderous, standing ovation. People were looking at him, then at me, then at the press table, connecting the dots, the Pierce name, the quiet, massive, old money publishing empire. The funds were not just doubled, they were exponentially secured. The archive was permanent. "In her honor," I said, my voice now loud over the applause, "we are officially renaming the foundation tonight. It is the Evelyn Reed Unconditional Love Archive." I looked out at the crowd, and I saw her. Sabrina. She was not at the table with my parents. She was standing near the back wall, by an exit. Her husband was gone. She was alone, her hand on her pregnant stomach, and she was weeping. They were not the angry, blotchy tears I had seen in the law office. They were quiet, shocked, uncomprehending tears. She was staring at me, at the stage, at my husband, at the entire, separate, powerful life I had built. And for the very first time, I think she was actually seeing me, not as her sister, not as her shadow, not as her rival, just as me, a person. The applause finally began to die down, and into that silence, a new sound, a chair scraping. My mother, she was walking, her face that same fixed, terrifying smile, toward the small auxiliary microphone on the side of the stage. She tapped it. "On behalf," she said, her voice high and strained, "on behalf of our family, I just want to say..." I moved. I did not run. I walked, with purpose, from the main podium, my own handheld microphone still live. I intercepted her, standing between her and the crowd, using my body to shield her, to shield the event, from this last desperate act of narrative hijacking. "Thank you, Mother," I said, and my voice was warm. It was kind. It was the last act of compassion I could give her. "Thank you for being here. It means so much." I turned back to the crowd, who had watched, confused. "Tonight," I said, "there is no us or them. There is no our family or their family. There is only the legacy of one woman, Evelyn Reed, a woman who believed, and who wrote, that love should never, ever be conditional." I smiled at the audience. "Thank you." The applause that followed was, if possible, even louder. Later, at the reception, the archives display was set up. Instead of a simple guest book, I had placed a massive, blank, leather-bound volume and a pod of beautiful ink pens. I called it the storybook. After my speech, I had invited everyone to sign it. "Do not just sign your name," I'd said. "Write a line of your own story. There is a place for everyone in this book. Everyone. Even my parents. As long as they are willing to write with the truth." From across the room, I watched them. I saw my father, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He looked at the book, saw the line of people waiting to sign it, and he looked at me. He did not sign. He walked straight to the coat check, grabbed his coat, and stormed out of the museum without a word. My mother hovered. She looked at the book, her hand fluttering at her pearls. She looked at my father's retreating back. She looked at me. Her entire identity, her entire life's purpose, was walking out the door. She hesitated, torn, then, like a ghost. She turned and followed him into the night. But Sabrina stayed. She waited, She waited until the crowd thinned. She walked up to the table, slowly, her hands still on her stomach. She looked at the book, at the stories people were writing. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking. She wrote one single line. I walked over as she was setting the pen down. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, her eyes red, her face puffy. I looked down at the book, at her handwriting, so similar to mine. She had written, "I am sorry I did not see you." I looked at her. The strategist in my head was gone. The EVP was gone. There were no words, no taglines. I opened my arms. She fell into them, and I hugged my sister. It was awkward. It was stiff. It was the hug of two strangers who had shared a childhood. It did not fix 30 years of damage. It was not forgiveness. It was not a total reconciliation. It was, however, the start of honesty. Graham found me an hour later, by the glass wall overlooking the lake. He slid his hand into mine. "Ready to go home, partner?" he whispered. "I am," I said. We were walking through the main lobby when I heard my name. "Nora! Nora Whitfield!" It was a reporter, from one of the local Seattle papers, the same one who had been outside the law office. She ran up, a microphone in her hand. "Ms. Whitfield, an incredible night. You've secured the archive. You've been vindicated. You have to tell me, after everything your family did, how does it feel? Is this revenge?" I stopped, I looked at her, and I thought about that word. Revenge. I thought about the cold, empty feeling of it. I smiled. "Revenge," I said, "is a cold, empty house. You might win it, but you'd have to live there, all alone. No, this isn't revenge." I squeezed Graham's hand. "This is architecture. This is how I build a house where no one is ever locked out." He smiled, and we turned away. We didn't go out the front door, where the cameras were waiting, where my father's limo had been. We slipped out the side entrance, through a heavy metal door, into the museum's loading bay. The second the door opened, the smell hit me. The sharp, clean, undeniable smell of Seattle. It was pouring, a classic, relentless, Pacific Northwest rain, the ozone, the wet pavement, the cold air. Graham and I looked at each other under the single, bare bulb of the loading bay, and we just laughed. "Of course," he said. "Of course," I replied. We ran, huddled together, laughing. We ran out from the shelter and into the street, the cold rain hitting us instantly. The Seattle rain smelled exactly the same as it had my whole life. But now, it was just the smell of home. They cut me from the list. I wrote a new one, longer, warmer, and needing no approval. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you are listening from, so please comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button. It helps get these stories out to more people who need to hear them.